You paid for me. Now finish it, she whispered, her voice broken hollow like a wound that never healed. But what the rancher found beneath that trembling plea left him devastated. Beneath the bruises, beneath the tears, was a truth so cruel it would burn into his bones forever. A truth that tied her suffering to the very grief he carried in silence. From that moment, there was no turning back. He could walk away, or he could stand against the wolves who had already taken everything from her. He chose the fight. And so began a ride into fire, blood, and redemption. Follow my story to the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I'll know how far this story travels. Colt Harrington sat slumped in the wooden chair boots planted heavy on the floorboards, revolver resting against his thigh. The lamp on the bedside table flickered low shadows stretching like long fingers across the peeling wallpaper. He had not slept, not for a minute. His bloodshot eyes stared at the faint crack in the ceiling, though his ears never drifted far from the sound of her breath. A shift against the mattress stirred him. The girl Lena Marlowe turned in her thin blanket, a tremor running down her frail frame. She tried to push herself up, elbows buckling beneath her, but her body betrayed her and she fell back with a gasp. The blanket slipped, baring bruised skin, and in a panic she clutched it back to her chest. Colt turned his head away. Not out of shame for her, but out of respect. "You don't have to be afraid," he said quietly, his voice rough from sleeplessness, yet steady like a rope drawn tight over a canyon. Her lips parted, but no sound came. For a moment, the silence between them grew so thick it felt like it would choke the air. Then with her forehead pressed to her knees, her voice finally scraped free, jagged and raw. "They sold me," she whispered. "Sold me after the baby came. Said I was no use with a mouth to feed. They took him from me. I don't even know where." Her words cracked splintered as though each one cut her throat on the way out. Colt's hands curled into fists so tight the veins rose against his skin. Hours after birth. Sold like cattle. A child ripped away before she even had the chance to name him. His heart thudded heavy and furious against his ribs. It was rage with nowhere to go, rage that clawed against his chest and left him shaking in silence. "Do you know his name?" Colt asked, voice low, almost breaking. She shook her head. "They wouldn't let me," she said. "Said he wasn't mine anymore." The room seemed to bend under the weight of that confession. For Colt, it was a blow that tore the old wound open again. His wife. His only love. She had died in a birthing bed, leaving him with a daughter who never drew breath. He had stood there helpless, watching life and death slip through his hands. Now this girl, this broken stranger, was bound by the same cruelty. He drew in a slow breath, the kind a man takes before riding into fire, knowing he might never ride back. Downstairs, heavy boots slammed against the floorboards. Voices barked sharp, hungry, like dogs scenting meat. The growl of Barlow Crane, the brothel keeper, cut through the racket. "Where's my girl?" he snarled. The rancher's had his turn. Now she goes back on the line. Colt's jaw locked. He rose from the chair, tall shoulders wide shadow, cutting across the bed. Lena's eyes widened in terror. For a heartbeat, she thought he might drag her down himself, throw her back into the teeth of the wolves, but Colt's hand went to the revolver. He rested his palm on the worn grip, steady, calm. "Stay under that blanket," he murmured. "Don't move. Don't speak." Confused, trembling Lena obeyed. The door shuddered beneath a pounding fist. "Time's up," a voice barked. Colt yanked it open before the second knock landed. Barlow stood in the hallway, fat belly pressing against his stained vest, sweat soaking through the cloth. His eyes gleamed with piggish greed. "Paid for 2 hours," Rancher Barlow sneered. "You got 3. Hand her back." His gaze darted past Colt's shoulder, trying to see the bed. Colt shifted, filling the doorway with his frame. "She ain't going back," he said, voice like thunder rolling over far-off mountains. For a moment, silence seared between them. Then Barlow laughed, sharp and ugly. "You think you can just take my property?" "That's money walking out the door, Harrington. She ain't yours." His fat hand twitched toward the knife on his belt. Colt's revolver was already half raised before steel ever cleared leather. The hammer clicked back sharp, final, like lightning splitting the sky. "You sold her like cattle," Colt growled. "I paid you double. She's done with you." The tone left no crack, no shadow for negotiation. Barlow's sneer faltered. His face twisted, greed curdling into fear. Behind him, two thugs shifted uneasily, hands hovering near their pistols. Their eyes flicked from Colt's steady gun to Barlow's sweating face, calculating whether coin was worth dying for. Colt didn't blink, didn't move. His finger rested light on the trigger, his eyes steady as forged iron. "Get out," Colt said, "or I'll put you in the ground and let the pigs pick your bones." Barlow spat curse thick on his lips, but his boots scuffed backward. Men like him survived on fear. Tonight he found a wall he could not climb. The door slammed. Colt slid the bolt into place, the metallic scrape loud in the stillness. When he turned, Lena was staring at him with wide eyes, lips parted like she'd forgotten how to breathe. She had never seen a man stand between her and the wolves. Why, she whispered. Colt holstered the revolver. His shoulders sagged heavy with memories that refused to loosen their grip. "Because someone should have done it for my wife," he said. "Because no one did it for you. And because I ain't about to let the devil take another soul under my watch." Her hands trembled as she covered her mouth. Tears spilled not of terror, but of something far more fragile. Hope. For Colt, the fight had only just begun, and for Lena, the night was no longer just a prison. It was the first step toward freedom. The floorboard still vibrated from the weight of retreating boots when Colt let his hand slip from the revolver grip. He stood there for a moment, breathing in the silence, the kind that comes after thunder. His jaw was tight, his body a coiled spring that had not yet found release. Behind him, Lena's breath quivered like the wings of a frightened bird. She clutched the blanket higher, her eyes not leaving him, her lips still parted as though she might speak but didn't dare. For a long beat, the only sound in the room was the hiss of the oil lamp fighting to stay alive. Finally, she whispered, You don't even know me. Why would you?" Her voice broke. The words fell apart. Colt turned slowly, the weight of years pressing down his broad shoulders. His gaze softened, though it carried storms behind it. "I know enough," he said. His voice was rough, like gravel dragged across wood. "I know what it means to lose a child. I know what it means to be left with nothing but ghosts." Her eyes blinked fast, wet, searching his face for lies, for mockery, for some hidden demand. But there was none. Just a man standing worn by grief, anchored by something stronger than his own misery. He took a step closer, and she tensed. His hand lifted not toward her, but toward the lamp. He turned the flame down low until the room was swallowed in half dark. "You need rest," he said. "I can't," she whispered, arms tightening around her knees. "Every time I close my eyes, I see them taking him. I see him crying, and then he's gone." Her voice cracked a knife's edge, slicing through the dark. Colt's throat worked, but he said nothing. His silence was its own confession. Downstairs, the saloon roared back to life. Glass shattered, laughter crude and sharp bled through the floorboards. It was a reminder that Barlow's retreat was only temporary. Lena flinched at each burst of noise. Colt's hand clenched at his side. He could feel the storm brewing. He knew men like Barlow. They never forgot a slight. They never forgave coin slipping from their pocket. He crouched near the bed, his weathered face lined by lamplight. "They'll come again?" he said flatly. "And when they do, I won't be waiting in this room with my back against a wall." "We ride before dawn." Her eyes widened. "Ride where north, my land." His jaw worked as if the words cost him more than coin ever could. "It's quiet, isolated. Ain't a soul there but me. No one will touch you there." Her lips trembled. "But they'll follow. Men like him don't stop. They'll take me back. They'll sell me again." Her voice crumpled, folded in on itself like her body bracing for chains. Colt leaned closer, his shadow long across her blanket. His words were iron, not loud, not cruel, but steady as an oath. "Not while I'm standing." The way he said it, plain unshaken, struck something inside her chest, something she had thought was dead. She swallowed hard, nodding, though fear still clung to her like a second skin. Colt stood and began gathering what little he carried: a battered saddlebag, a canteen, a worn coat draped across a chair. He checked the revolver, spun the cylinder, slid it back into the holster. Each motion was calm, deliberate. Lena watched him bewildered. Every man she had known wanted something from her: money, flesh, obedience. This one wanted nothing but to stand between her and the world. Her heart ached with the strangeness of it. The hours crawled until dawn began to bleed faint light across the window pane. Colt saddled his horse in the stable, the leather creaking, the smell of hay and dust thick in the air. Lena stood near the doorway, her thin blanket wrapped around her shoulders like armor. Her legs shook, but she forced herself to step forward. "Where are you taking me?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Colt pulled the cinch strap tight, the sound sharp in the still morning hush. He paused, turned his head toward her. "Away from here," he said, "to a place where no one can trade you again." Her eyes flickered with doubt, but also with something else, longing. She glanced back toward the saloon where lanterns still glowed, where laughter still echoed. It was a pit, a cage, a grave. To leave was to step into a world she no longer trusted. To stay was to die slowly. Her chest rose and fell quick. "But they'll hunt us." Colt's gaze was steady. "Then let 'em. I've been hunted before." She opened her mouth, closed it, then pressed her lips tight. Colt stepped forward, lifting her gently onto the horse. She gripped the saddle horn knuckles, white, her whole body rigid. "Easy," he murmured. His tone carried no command, only patience. Then he mounted behind her, one arm braced lightly at her side. Not holding, not taking, only steadying. The horse shifted, muscles alive beneath them. The first hoofbeat struck the earth as the town slept. They slipped into the plains, swallowed by night's fading cloak. Above, the stars still burned, scattered across the black like shattered glass. The moon hung pale, painting the land in silver. For the first time, Lena was not behind locked doors. She was not counted coin. She was not a name scratched off a ledger. Yet freedom felt more terrifying than chains. She clutched the blanket tighter, heart hammering against her ribs, each beat screaming that at any moment she might be dragged back into the dark. Behind them, the town shrank, lanterns glowing faint and far. But even at a distance, she could swear she heard Barlow's voice echoing after them. Colt didn't look back. He spurred the horse harder. "Hold on," he said, low, steady. Her body pressed against his chest, trembling as the dawn wind tore past them. Somewhere behind shadows, stirred voices rose, and the hunt was already gathering. The hooves beat a steady rhythm, pounding against the frozen ground, echoing like war drums in the gray dawn. Colt Harrington leaned low in the saddle, his arm steadying Lena as the mare pushed through the prairie grass. The horizon stretched wide and merciless before them, sky bleeding from night into a cold wash of pink. Lena clutched the saddle horn with both hands, her fingers raw, her breath coming in short gasps. She dared not look back, though every nerve in her body screamed that eyes, greedy, ravenous eyes, were already upon them. Colt glanced over his shoulder. The town was a smear of smoke, now distant, but not gone. He knew men like Barlow Crane. They were dogs that hunted with coin in their teeth, and he had just taken from him a prize that Barlow would never release without blood. The girl shifted, her thin frame trembling against him. "I can't," she whispered, the wind carrying her words away. "I can't do this. They'll find me. They always do." Colt's hand tightened gently at her side, not to restrain, but to keep her upright. "They won't," he said, his voice a growl against the dawn. "Not while I'm breathing." The words struck her harder than the cold. She closed her eyes, let them echo in her chest, though fear still clawed at her heart. The mare crested a low ridge, and Colt guided her down toward the river. Water shimmered silver in the morning light, moving swift and cold. He pulled the reins, slowing their pace. "We'll cross here," he said. Lena stiffened. "The water, it'll cover our trail." He slid from the saddle boots, sinking into damp earth. "Come on." She hesitated, every bone in her body begging to stay seated, to cling to the one place that felt solid. But Colt's hand reached up, patient, steady. After a beat, she let him help her down. The river hissed as it flowed, wild and sharp with the bite of snowmelt. Colt led the horse into the current water rising against his thighs. He tugged the reins firm, guiding the animal across. Lena stumbled, her thin shoes slipping on the stones. Colt caught her wrist, gripping tight. "Easy," he said, "one step at a time." Her breath came in ragged bursts, but she followed. Cold burned her legs like knives, her teeth chattering so hard she thought they might crack. Halfway across, she gasped, knees buckling. Colt pulled her upright, his arm around her waist, now holding her against him. The strength in his grip was iron, but it carried no hunger, no cruelty, only certainty. When they reached the far bank, Lena collapsed into the grass, curling against herself, shivering uncontrollably. Colt crouched beside her, pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders, and pressed a canteen to her lips. "Drink," he ordered. Her eyes lifted to his, searching again for the trap, the demand that must surely follow. She saw none. Only a man kneeling in the dirt, as worn as she was, as haunted. Water slid down her throat, harsh but life-giving. Her voice cracked when she finally spoke. "You don't know what he'll do. Barlow, he doesn't let go. He'll send men. He'll pay them. He'll hunt me down until—" Her body curled tighter, arms locking across her stomach. "Until I'm back in his cage." Colt's eyes narrowed, jaw hard as stone. He had heard men like Barlow in the army. He had seen them, men who believed others were theirs to use, to discard, to sell. His silence stretched long. Then he spoke, each word measured. "I lost my wife in childbirth. My daughter never took her first breath." Lena's shivering eased just slightly. Her eyes flicked toward him, uncertain. "I sat by that bed." Colt continued, his voice raw, like leather worn thin. "Watched her slip away while I held her hand. And I swore to myself that if ever I saw the same cruelty rise again, I'd meet it with fire." His eyes locked on hers. "And here you are, sold the moment life came from you. I won't let him take you again. Not him. Not anyone." Her throat tightened, tears pressing hot at the corners of her eyes. She pressed her palm to her mouth, muffling the sob that broke loose anyway. For the first time, the tears weren't just for what she lost. They were for what she had found, something impossible, something she didn't know how to hold. A man who did not want to own her, only to stand between her and the storm. The sound of distant hoofbeats shattered the fragile silence. Colt's head snapped up, eyes narrowing toward the ridge. The faint glint of steel caught the morning light. "They're coming," he muttered. Lena froze. Already. They wasted no time. He rose, pulling her to her feet. "Move!" He swung her back into the saddle, vaulted up behind her, and drove the mare forward. The chase had begun again, relentless as the sun climbing into the sky. They raced through the plains, wind-whipping earth trembling beneath them. Colt's hand rested steady against the revolver, his eyes scanning for cover. The game had changed now. Barlow's men were no longer just shadows in the dark. They were hunters, and they had caught the scent. The wind cut sharp across the open prairie, stinging like tiny blades against Lena's cheeks as the mare surged forward. Every hoofbeat jarred her bones. Every rush of air seemed to whisper of chains clinking just behind her. She clung to the saddle horn as if it were the only anchor keeping her from being swept into the storm chasing at their backs. Colt Harrington's arm pressed lightly against her side, steady but never invasive, guiding her balance. His other hand gripped the reins with surety, his eyes scanning every ridge, every fold of land. The land was wide, yes, but not wide enough to keep men like Barlow Crane from closing the gap. Behind them, the thrum of pursuit was no longer a distant rumor. It was clear, hooves heavy and insistent, shouts carried on the morning wind, sharp curses ripping through the silence. "They're closer," Lena gasped, twisting her head, but instantly regretting it. The sight of shadowy riders growing against the horizon nearly froze her blood. "Don't look back," Colt said firmly, voice low and commanding. His jaw was set, his body braced. "We'll lose 'em." She wanted to believe him, but the pounding behind her felt like a noose tightening. Every memory of being dragged, shoved, sold echoed in her chest. Her breath hitched wild and uneven. "Colt," she whispered, panic surging. I can't go back. I'll die before you won't." His answer came before she could finish, as if he had already carved it in stone. "Not while I'm standing." His certainty struck her harder than the cold air. It didn't matter if it was true or not. What mattered was that he believed it, and she felt it solid, unshakable, as though the words themselves formed a shield around her. The mare veered left as Colt tugged the reins, leading them down a slope toward the river again. The water shimmered in the growing light, glistening like molten silver. The current ran fierce and wild, swollen from the spring melt. Colt slowed the horse to a trot, eyes darting to the ridge above. Barlow's men appeared there, dark outlines against the rising sun. They were too far for gunfire yet, but their numbers were heavy, at least half a dozen, maybe more. "They'll try to cut us off," Colt muttered mostly to himself. Then louder for her. "Hold on tight. Before Lena could question, he drove the mare straight into the river. The animal plunged with a snort, water exploding around them, icy spray soaking through their clothes. The current seized at their legs, tugging hard, desperate to sweep them downstream. Lena gasped, clinging to the horn knuckles bone white. Her teeth chattered violently as water surged up to her thighs. Colt's voice cut through the roar. "Breathe! Don't fight it! Let the horse do the work!" She tried. God, she tried, but every second in that current felt like drowning. She could almost hear chains rattling in the water, dragging her down. Her body trembled, and her lips shaped a silent prayer she thought she'd forgotten how to say. Then Colt's hand came down over hers, steady, anchoring her against the madness. "You're not going back," he said, his words nearly lost to the water's roar. "Not today. Not ever." The mare fought, hard muscles straining, but Colt urged her on with firm commands, guiding her toward the far bank. Step by step, they pushed through until hooves found solid ground again. Lena collapsed against his chest, her body shaking uncontrollably. Her breath came in ragged sobs, but she clutched him as though clinging to life itself. Colt pulled the horse onto the bank and guided her into a grove of cottonwoods, their branches twisting overhead. The cover was thick enough to hide them from immediate sight. He dismounted, lifting Lena down gently. She sank to the ground, knees buckling, hands pressing against the wet earth. Tears mixed with river water streaking her cheeks. "I can't do this," she whispered, voice raw. "I'm not strong enough. They'll keep coming and I'll break." "I always break." Colt crouched in front of her, his broad frame filling her vision. His eyes burned steady, fierce like fire, banked but ready. "You're stronger than you think," he said. "You've lived through worse than any of them could imagine. They broke pieces of you, but they didn't take all of you. You're still here." Her lips trembled, her chest heaving. His hand hovered for a moment, then settled gently on her shoulder. Not heavy, not demanding, just there. "I'm not asking you to fight this alone," he added. "I'll carry the weight. But you've got to believe you deserve to be carried." The words struck deep, shaking something loose inside her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like coin to be traded. She didn't feel like a shadow in a cage. She felt seen. A crack split her heart wide open, and tears poured freely. But these were different. Not only tears of terror, but of something fragile, something she had thought she lost forever. Hope. Colt stood again, scanning the ridge. The riders had slowed, searching the far side of the river, unsure which way the fugitives had gone. He exhaled hard, then turned back to her. "We'll rest here a moment. Then we ride north. I know a place where they won't follow." Her head lifted slowly, eyes swollen from crying. "Why?" she asked again, her voice breaking. "Why risk yourself? You could leave me and be free of this." Colt's jaw tightened. His gaze drifted toward the horizon where the sky stretched endless and merciless. "Because no one stood for my wife when death came for her," he said. "And no one stood for you when they chained you. That's reason enough." The silence that followed was thick but not empty. It carried the weight of his vow, and the first flicker of her belief. Somewhere in the distance, a crow called harsh and lonely. Colt adjusted his revolver belt, eyes never leaving the ridge. He knew this was only the beginning. The hunt was far from over, and the storm was still gathering. The grove of cottonwood shielded them for only a short while. Sunlight pierced through the branches in thin spears, dust motes swirling where it struck. Lena sat with her knees drawn to her chest, blanket pulled tight around her, shivering though the morning was warming. Her body remembered the river's bite. Her heart remembered the men still riding after her. Colt Harrington paced the edge of the grove boots, sinking into damp soil, revolver never far from his hand. His eyes tracked the ridge, watching the faint shapes of Barlow's men scatter like wolves sniffing the air. They had lost the trail at the water, but he knew their hunt wouldn't stop. Not until one side lay cold in the dirt. The mare snorted softly, shaking her wet mane ears, flicking nervously at distant echoes. Colt laid a hand on her neck, murmuring low to calm her. The animal steadied, though her muscles remained tense, ready to bolt at a whisper of danger. Behind him, Lena's voice cracked the silence. "I don't deserve this." Colt turned, brows furrowed. "What?" Her eyes lifted, swollen and red but hard, with something he hadn't seen before, shame sharpened into defiance. "I don't deserve saving," she said, each word trembling but forced out like broken glass. "Do you hear me? Men have taken me, used me, sold me. I'm ruined. Whatever I was before she's gone, all that's left is nothing worth dying for." Her chest heaved, her voice splintering at the end. She pressed her fists against her temples as if to crush the thought back inside. Colt's jaw worked, the muscles in his face shifting like stone grinding against stone. For a moment, silence stretched heavy between them. Then he crouched, low boots pressing into the earth, his weathered face level with hers. The lines around his eyes deepened as he studied her, but his voice came low and certain. "You're wrong." She flinched, shaking her head. "You don't know what they've done to me. I know enough." His voice carried weight, each word a hammer driving home a truth she couldn't dodge. "I know what they tried to take doesn't belong to them, doesn't belong to any man. What's left of you, what's still here—" He tapped his chest with a calloused finger. "That belongs to you, and it's worth every breath I've got." Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears slid silently down her cheeks. She tried to look away, but Colt's gaze was steady, pulling her back. "You hear me?" he pressed. "You're not ruined. You're living, and as long as you're living, you ain't done yet." Her throat worked around a sob. Slowly she nodded, though doubt still clung like a second skin. Colt stood broad shoulders, casting a shadow across her frail frame. "Get some strength in you," he said quietly. "We've got a long road, and Barlow won't quit until he's in the ground." The mention of Barlow sent a shiver tearing through Lena's spine. Colt glanced at the sky, gauging the sun's climb. "We move north by dusk. Till then you rest. I'll keep watch." She wanted to protest, to tell him she could never sleep again, but exhaustion pressed her down like lead. Her body sagged against the roots of the cottonwood eyelids, heavy. Before long, despite her fear, despite her shame, sleep pulled her under. Colt leaned against the trunk nearby, revolver across his lap, eyes never still. Every creak of branch, every whisper of wind he measured. His mind burned with memory, the image of his wife pale in the bed lips parting for a final breath. The silence of a cradle that never held life. And now Lena, another soul ground beneath cruelty, another life he refused to let slip away. The sun crawled higher, shadows shrinking. From the ridge came faint movement, two riders searching along the far bank. Colt's hand slid to the revolver thumb, brushing the hammer, but they passed without spotting the hidden grove. Hours later, Lena stirred with a start, clutching the blanket to her chest. Her eyes darted wildly until they landed on him, still seated, still watching. "You didn't sleep," she whispered. Colt's lips curled into the faintest shadow of a smile. "Didn't need to." Her throat tightened. No man had ever kept watch for her. No man had ever stayed without asking something in return. As dusk bled into the sky, Colt rose, tightening the saddle straps. "On your feet," he said. "We ride light, fast, and quiet." Lena rose shakily, legs trembling from more than just fatigue. She allowed him to lift her onto the mare once more. When he mounted, behind his presence at her back carried no hunger, only protection. They rode as the sun dyed, shadows swallowing the plains. Lanterns flared again in the distance, voices shouting faint but fierce. Barlow's men had picked up the trail. The hunt was not finished. It had only just begun. Night bled into a thin, gray morning by the time Colt Harrington found what he'd been hoping for, a ruin with walls enough to hold out the wind. The old homestead hunched against a low rise, its porch half collapsed, its windows punched out like missing teeth. A weathered windmill creaked lazily, turning just enough to complain. Colt drew the mare to a halt beneath a stand of juniper and put 2 fingers to his lips. A soft whistle. The horse stilled. "Stay," he murmured to Lena, easing down. "I'll look first." Her fingers tightened around the saddle horn. The thought of him vanishing into that ruined shell while she waited alone exposed made something cold curl in her stomach. "Don't leave me long," she said, breathless. "Minutes," he promised. "If I'm not back, ride north along the rise. Keep the windmill at your right shoulder. Don't stop." She swallowed, nodding, though fear climbed her throat like barbed wire. Colt ghosted toward the house boots, finding silence out of habit. He skimmed the porch, tested the boards, peered through the broken panes. Inside a table lay on its side, a chair split across the middle. Bone-dry dust veiled everything. No recent prints, no fresh ash in the stove. Empty, the kind of empty that happens when time itself forgets a place existed. He circled the yard, checked the collapsing barn, found a narrow lean-to still mostly standing, enough shadow to hide a horse. When he returned, Lena's eyes were huge and wet. She flinched when he reached up, then caught herself breathing hard, letting him lift her down. "You're shaking," he said. "I can't seem to stop," she whispered. He led her into the house, guiding her around the holes in the floorboards. Dust leapt in tiny storms with every step. In the far corner under the window frame, he spread a saddle blanket and motioned for her to sit. The room smelled of old wood and mouse nests. A cracked plate lay in the corner, a child's wooden spool beside it. Lena stared at the spool until her vision blurred. For a heartbeat, she saw a tiny hand roll it back to her. Then the image broke like glass. She folded inward palms pressed to her eyes. Colt crouched and set a canteen beside her, followed by a small packet of jerky and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. He didn't speak. He didn't reach for her. He only made a small, careful camp in the quiet, as if the rightness of his presence could be proof enough. When she could breathe again, she took a slow sip, then another. The water hit her stomach like life returning. "I keep thinking if I was stronger," she said hoarsely, "I'd have saved him. I'd have fought harder." Colt's gaze didn't waver. "You were bleeding and alone," he said. "Strength isn't a miracle. It's a thing a body can't make when it's been stripped. What happened to you wasn't weakness, it was theft." Her mouth trembled. That word theft fit the shape of her hurt too perfectly. He nodded toward the biscuits. "Eat. We move again when the light turns." She broke the biscuit with shaking fingers, the crumbs a small storm in her lap. After a bite, then 2 warmth spread through her like a candle lit inside a cold room. Outside, the wind toyed with the windmill. The creek rose and fell like a tired voice. Colt stepped to the doorway and studied the rise. Far-off riders angled across the prairie, following the river's bend cutting for sign the way men do when coin buys their hunger. Too distant for concern now. Not distant enough to relax. He returned, rolled his shoulders, and set his revolver on the tip table within easy reach. "Foot wraps off," he said gently. "Let your skin dry. We can't have you blistered to bone." She stared as if he'd spoken in another language, then obeyed. Her feet were white and wrinkled from the river, the skin rubbed raw at the heels. Colt tore a strip from a clean shirt in his saddlebag, folded it, and handed it to her. "For padding," he said. And from the bag he drew a small knife with a worn bone handle. He weighed it in his palm, then set it on the blanket between them. Her eyes darted from the knife to his face. Fear, confusion, something like gratitude too fragile as the first skim of ice on a pond. "I don't," she began. "You won't need it if I'm breathing," he said, "but I want you to know you're not empty-handed anymore." She stared at the blade as if it could speak. Then she nodded, slow, solemn, like accepting a vow. The afternoon waned. Hoofbeats echoed faint on the far ridge. Colt motioned her into silence, the 2 of them pressing into the shadows while the hunters swept wide. Minutes dragged until finally the sound thinned into nothing but the groan of the windmill again. Only then did Colt breathe long and even. "We've got a window," he said. "Let's use it." The sun had nearly drowned itself in the horizon when Colt Harrington and Lena Marlowe slipped from the broken homestead and mounted the mare again. Shadows stretched long and jagged across the plain, painting the ground in stripes of fading gold and black. The air smelled of sage and dust sharp enough to sting. Colt kept his hat low, eyes scanning every fold of the land. He knew Barlow's men were still circling hungry wolves following a scent. Coin kept them loyal, but fear kept them mean. Sooner or later, the 2 would collide, and that's when things would get bloody. Lena held the blanket tight around her shoulders. The knife Colt had given her rested in her lap. She hadn't touched it since. Her fingers ghosted over the bone handle now and then, as if testing whether it was truly real. They rode north in silence, the mare's hooves muffled by dry grass. The quiet gave room for ghosts, and ghosts filled every corner of Colt's mind. His wife's face rose in the fading light. Eliza smiling in the spring sun hair, dark as Ravenwing's hand on her belly, heavy with promise. He had been a younger man, then reckless, sure that land and love were enough to stand against anything. He remembered the night she labored, the way her hand crushed his as hours dragged her body broken by the effort to bring life into the world. He remembered the stillness afterward, his daughter never drawing a breath. Eliza fading with a final whisper that clung to him still. He tightened his jaw, staring into the gathering dark. Beside him, Lena stirred her voice, a rasp in the wind. "Do you ever see them?" Colt blinked. "Who?" "The ones you've lost." Her eyes glimmered in the last light. "Every time I close mine, I see him. My baby. I never even held him, but I still feel his weight like he's pressed into my arms. And then—" Her voice broke into a sob. "Then he's gone." Colt's throat worked, but no words came at first. He looked at her, saw her trembling hands clutched over her chest, as if she were still trying to cradle what had been stolen. "Yes," he said, finally, voice rough. "I see them. My wife, my daughter. Some nights I swear I hear them in the wind. It's like grief don't die. It just rides with you, quiet, waiting." Her eyes searched his face, desperate for something more than silence. "What do you do?" she whispered. Colt looked back toward the horizon where the sun's last sliver bled red as an open wound. "You keep riding," he said. "You put one boot in front of the other. You hold on to what's left, even if it's nothing but a name and a prayer." Her breath shuddered, but she nodded slowly as if his words stitched something fragile inside her back together. The night deepened. Stars burned cold and clear. They camped near a shallow draw, Colt tying the mare in the shadows of scrub oak. He lit. No fire flame was a beacon, and tonight the hunters prowled close. They ate in silence, jerky tough between their teeth. Water passed between them in the dim. The earth was hard beneath them, but Lena wrapped herself in the blanket and leaned against the saddle, propped near a rock. Her eyes drooped, then fluttered open. Fear kept her awake. Colt sat a few feet away, revolver across his lap, gaze sweeping the darkness. He seemed carved from stone, unmoving except for the slow rhythm of his breath. Finally, she whispered, almost ashamed of the sound, "I don't know how to trust this." His head-turned eyes narrowing slightly. "Trust what you?" "A man who doesn't want to take. A man who doesn't demand. Every time I think I understand what you are, I remember all the others. And I wait for the mask to fall." Colt's mouth pressed into a thin line. When he spoke, his words were low, certain, heavy with promise. "There's no mask, Lena. What I am, you already see. Just a man too tired of graves, too tired of devils walking free." Her eyes filled again, but this time the tears didn't fall. They clung glittering in starlight like they too refused to let go. She lay down, finally clutching the blanket knife tucked at her side. Sleep came in broken waves filled with flashes of chains and shadows. But when she startled awake, Colt was always there, head bowed, hand never far from steel, guarding her through the long hours. Near dawn, movement stirred on the ridge. Colt caught the faint silhouette of riders pausing, scanning the valley. They hadn't lost the trail after all. He drew in a long breath, jaw tight. He knew it now without doubt there would be no outrunning this forever. Sooner or later, Barlow's men would force the fight. And when that day came, blood would write the answer. The morning broke thin in cold light stretching across the prairie in pale streaks. Colt Harrington watched the ridge with the patience of a man who had spent years reading the land like scripture. The riders had not vanished, they had only pulled back waiting. Men like Barlow Crane didn't waste effort when patience could do the bleeding for them. Colt tightened the saddle cinch and lifted Lena up. Her face was pale lips, cracked eyes hollow from another sleepless night. But her jaw had a set to it now, a small defiance that hadn't been there before. She still shook, but she held herself straighter in the saddle. "We keep moving," Colt said. Lena swallowed hard. "And when they catch us?" He mounted behind her, settling his weight with a grunt. His arm braced lightly at her side. "Then they'll wish they hadn't," he said. The mare carried them north, hooves drumming across hard earth. Hours passed, the land rolling into hills scarred with rock and scrub. The sky seemed endless, a canvas too wide to ever escape. But Lena's chest stayed tight, every gust of wind sounding like riders closing in. They crested a canyon edge by midday, the land plunging into a narrow cut of stone. The trail twisted between cliffs hemmed in tight. Colt slowed the mare, scanning the shadows below. "Bad ground," he muttered. "Too many places for an ambush." Lena's fingers clenched the horn. "Then we shouldn't—" The crack of a rifle split the air. Stone burst near Colt's boot shards, biting his leg. The mare reared, screaming, nearly throwing them both. Down Colt barked. He yanked Lena from the saddle, dragging her behind a jagged outcrop as another shot screamed past. The horse bolted reins, flying hooves pounding into the canyon depths. Colt shoved Lena low against the stone revolver already drawn. 3 riders emerged from the shadows. Faces' mean eyes flat with greed. Barlow's dogs. Well, well, one sneered, his teeth yellow in the light. The rancher thought he could steal from the boss. Colt rose halfway, revolver leveled. She ain't yours to steal, he growled. The second thug laughed, spitting into the dirt. Everything's his if he paid for it. The third nudged his horse forward, rifle steady. Hand her over, Harrington. Maybe you walk away. Colt's eyes narrowed, steady as iron. She's not going anywhere with you. The standoff cracked like a whip. The rifleman fired first. Colt dropped to a knee, returning a shot that spun the man sideways in his saddle. Blood sprayed the canyon wall as he toppled. The others charged, pistols drawn. Stay down, Colt barked over his shoulder. Lena pressed into the stone heart, slamming ears ringing. Colt's revolver thundered again. One rider fell, hard dust exploding around his body. The last man swerved, firing wildly. Bullets screaming past Colt's head. Colt dove, rolled, and came up firing. The shot struck the horse's shoulder, sending the beast crashing to the ground. The thug tumbled screaming as the animal crushed his leg. Silence roared in the canyon, broken only by the horse's ragged cries. Colt strode forward, revolver still aimed. The pinned man writhed, spitting curses, hand groping for his pistol. Colt kicked it away, cold fury burning in his gaze. Tell Barlow, he said, voice low as thunder. She's not his anymore. Tell him if he wants her, he'll have to walk into the fire himself. The thug's eyes widened, breath hissing through his teeth. Colt turned his back and returned to Lena. Her hands were pressed to her mouth, eyes-wide tears streaking her cheeks. She had seen violence before, but never like this violence that shielded instead of consumed. Colt, she whispered, trembling, you killed them. His revolver slid back into the holster with a final click. I did, he said flatly. And I'll do it again if it means you stay free. Her lips parted, words caught between fear and something else. She didn't know what to name it. He crouched low, meeting her eyes. Are you afraid of me now? Her breath shuddered. She wanted to say yes, but she shook her head instead. No, she whispered. Not of you. For the first time he saw it, the faintest spark of trust, fragile as glass but real. He helped her stand, his hand steady beneath her elbow. The mare had fled deeper into the canyon, but Colt whistled sharp. After a moment the horse limped back, sides lathered but loyal. He stroked her neck, murmured calm, then lifted Lena into the saddle once more. The canyon walls rose around them as they rode, deeper shadows swallowing the blood behind them. Colt knew what the message he left would mean. Barlow would come now. Not just his dogs, not just his coin, he'd come himself. And when that happened, the fire Colt promised would burn hotter than either of them could survive. The canyon funneled them northward, its walls towering like silent judges on either side. Dust rose in faint clouds beneath the mare's hooves, mingling with the faint smell of blood still clinging to Colt's revolver. Lena sat stiff in the saddle, her hands trembling around the horn. She had not spoken since the ambush. Her mind replayed the thunder of gunfire, the way men's bodies fell lifeless into the dirt, and how Colt stood through it all, unyielding, carved from stone. But what seared deeper than the killing was the way his back had stayed between her and every bullet. She turned her head slightly, voice fragile. You could have left me. It would have been easier. Colt's jaw flexed as he rode, his eyes fixed on the narrowing trail ahead. Easier don't mean right. Her lips trembled. The words cut through her like sunlight breaking clouds. By midday, the canyon widened into broken country, rocky ridges, pockets of cedar and dry creek beds twisting like scars across the land. Colt slowed the mare and finally dismounted. We'll rest here, he said, scanning the horizon. I'll set snares. You stay low. Lena's brow furrowed. Snares. For rabbits, he explained, pulling a coil of wire from his saddlebag. We'll need meat if we're to keep running. She slid carefully from the saddle, her legs weak beneath her. Watching him work with sure, quiet movements stirred something inside her chest. No man had ever thought of her needs beyond what she could provide them. Colt thought of her stomach, her feet, her survival. As he set the snares, Lena crouched nearby, her eyes on the small knife he'd given her. She drew it from the blanket fold and turned it over in her hands, the bone handle worn smooth by years. Its weight was strange but steadying. Colt returned squatting beside her. His gaze flicked to the blade. "You know how to use it." She shook her head, shame rising. He didn't scold, didn't mock. Instead, he placed a twig in her hand. "Hold it like this," he said, curling her fingers around the hilt. His rough, warm hands guided hers, steadying her trembling grip. "Point forward. If someone comes at you, don't wave it. Drive it. Hard. Right here." He touched his chest above his heart. Her breath quickened. Heart hammering at the intimacy of his nearness, though his touch carried no hunger. She swallowed hard. "I'll never be able to—" "You will," he said firm, "because one day it might be the only thing between you and a chain." She knotted her throat tight. For the first time, she believed him. They stayed hidden in the rocky outcrop until dusk. The snares yielded 2 rabbits small, but enough. Colt cleaned them with practiced hands, Lena watching with wide eyes as he skinned, gutted, and spitted the meat. The smell of roasting flesh curled through the twilight, making her stomach clench with hunger she hadn't felt in days. She ate slowly, tears slipping down her cheeks with each bite. "Why are you crying?" Colt asked softly, leaning against a stone, chewing his own share. "Because I forgot what it feels like," she whispered. "To be fed. To be alive." The words tore at Colt's chest. He looked away, eyes burning with rage he couldn't spend yet. Night fell stars spilling across the sky like a river of fire. Colt built no fire now, only the faint embers buried in sand smoke masked by the wind. He stretched his coat on the ground for her, settling himself a few feet away, revolver loose in his hand. Lena lay curled, staring at him in the dark. The questions pressed so hard against her chest, she finally let one break free. "Why me?" Colt shifted his silhouette cut against the stars. "What do you mean?" "You don't know me," she said. Her voice cracked fragile. "Why fight for me like this?" His silence stretched so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Finally, his voice came low, rough, with something deeper than grief. "Because the world's full of men who think taking is the only way to live. If one of us don't stand up, then no one ever will. Maybe it won't change much, but it'll change you. And that's enough." Her throat ached as tears slipped silently. She turned her face into the blanket hiding them, though she knew he saw. The prairie wind moaned through the rocks, a lonely hymn. At the edge of the camp, the mare lifted her head, ears pricking. Colt sat upright, revolver-raised eyes narrowing toward the black horizon. Faint flickers of firelight danced their lanterns swaying in the night. Barlow's men were still on the trail, and this time they were closer. The lanterns crawled across the horizon like fireflies bred for war. 1, then 3, then half a dozen. The glow bobbed in the dark as riders fanned out, combing the land with greed in their eyes and steel in their hands. Colt Harrington lowered his revolver slowly, jaw locked tight. "They're closer than I'd like," he muttered. Lena pushed herself upright, the blanket clutched around her shoulders. Fear hollowed her voice. "How many? Too many." He slid the revolver back into its holster, then turned to her. "But not enough to take you while I'm breathing." The words struck like a bell in her chest, steadying her, though her body still shook. He rose, gathering the saddlebag and checking the mare's bridle. "Get ready. We move now." Her hands fumbled with the knife he'd given her, tucking it into the folds of her blanket, as though the blade itself might burn her. She staggered to her feet, her legs weak but willing. Colt hoisted her onto the mare, then swung up behind his arm, a protective wall at her side. The horse surged forward, hooves thudding low and fast, carrying them through the broken country. The night air cut sharp across their faces. Every shadow seemed alive, every rustle of grass like breath on the back of the neck. Lena pressed against him, her whisper torn from her throat. "They'll never stop, will they?" "Not until Barlow's in the dirt," Colt said. The name hung heavy between them. It wasn't just a man they fled. Now it was an empire of cruelty built on fear and coin. The chase stretched deep into the night. Colt guided the mare through narrow ravines, across dry creek beds, and up onto rocky ridges, always seeking ground that might cover their trail. But each time he paused to listen, he heard it, the distant pound of pursuit, steady as his own heartbeat. Hours later, when the moon dipped low, Colt finally pulled the mare into the shelter of a narrow gulch. He swung down, lifting Lena gently to the ground. She clung to his arm, her knees nearly giving. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "I can't keep running forever." Colt crouched low, meeting her eyes in the pale light. "You won't have to," he said. "They'll push us into a corner, and when they do, I'll end it." Her breath hitched. "You mean kill him?" Colt's gaze was steady, merciless. "Barlow's lived too long off the backs of souls he broke. Men like him don't stop breathing until someone makes them." Lena shuddered, wrapping her arms tight around herself. She wanted to argue to say killing solved nothing, but deep inside she knew it was true. If Barlow lived, she would never be free. The gulch was narrow, the walls rising steep. Colt found a ledge where they could shelter, half hidden from view. He tethered the mare and motioned for Lena to sit. She sank onto the stone, exhausted beyond measure. But sleep would not come. Her mind filled with her baby's cry, with the sound of Colt's gunfire, with the faces of men falling in the dust. Colt sat a few feet away, his revolver across his knees, eyes glinting faint in the moonlight. The silence stretched heavy. Finally, Lena broke it. "When they sold me, I prayed someone would see me. Not save me, just see me." Her voice cracked and she buried her face in her hands. "No one ever did. Not until you." Colt's chest tightened, his throat thick with unspoken grief. He looked at her, small and trembling, yet still here, and for a moment he saw not just her, but Eliza too, his wife, her ghost flickering in the girl's fragility. He swallowed hard, voice rough. "You're seen now, and as long as I breathe, you'll stay that way." Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, but beneath the tears something shifted. Not just fear, not just pain. A seed planted fragile as new grass in spring. Trust. The hours dragged, broken only by the wind clawing through the canyon. Colt dozed in half sleep, every sense sharpened for the sound of hoofbeats. Near dawn, Lena stirred, her voice small but steady. "Teach me." Colt blinked, lifting his head. "Teach you what?" Her hand trembled as she pointed toward his revolver. "That. If they come for us, I don't want to just hide." For a long moment, Colt stared at her, the weight of her request settling deep. She was raw, broken, frightened. But inside her flickered a fire that no man, not even Barlow, had managed to snuff out. He picked up the revolver, turning it in his hand, then placed it carefully in her palm. Her eyes widened at the weight, her breath catching. His hand closed over hers, steadying. First thing he said softly, "Don't fear it. Fear's what makes your hand shake, and shaking'll get you killed. Grip it firm, aim straight, and if you pull that trigger, you mean it." Her chest rose and fell fast, but she nodded. "I'll try." "No," he corrected, his voice calm but unyielding. "You'll do it. There ain't room for half measures out here." Her eyes met his, trembling but resolute. And in that look, Colt saw what he'd been hoping for, strength not borrowed from him, but rising inside her own bones. Above them, the sky lightened with the first cut of dawn. And somewhere on the wind, faint but growing, came the sound of hoofbeats again. The hunt had not ended. It was circling closer, waiting for blood. The hoofbeats grew louder with the rising sun rolling across the plains like distant thunder. Colt Harrington crouched at the edge of the gulch, eyes scanning the horizon where dust plumes smudged the morning sky. Barlow Crane's men had found the trail again. Behind him, Lena Marlowe gripped the revolver he had pressed into her hand hours before. Her fingers trembled, her chest tight, but she held it as though letting go would mean surrendering herself back into chains. "Stay low," Colt murmured. "Don't fire unless you've no choice." Her throat worked dry, but she whispered back, "Will they come here?" "They will," Colt said grimly. "Dogs follow a scent until they choke on it, and these are dogs fed on silver and fear." The mare stamped nervously, ears flicking at the echoes. Colt stroked her neck, steadying her. His calm hands gave the illusion of control, but inside he knew the truth. This fight had come sooner than he wanted. Lena crawled closer, the revolver clutched to her chest. Her voice broke. "Colt, if they take me, don't let them. Please. Not alive." The plea hit him harder than any bullet could. He turned, meeting her wide, tear-bright eyes. "No one's taking you," he said. His voice carried the weight of iron. "Not while I'm standing. The words hung between them more oath than comfort. A shadow moved on the ridge, then another. 5 riders. 6. Maybe more. They fanned out rifles glinting in the sun eyes, sweeping the canyon floor. "Stay back," Colt said, rising. The first shot cracked the air stone, splintering inches from his head. He ducked, rolled into cover, and returned fire. The canyon erupted in echoes of gunfire, thunder bouncing between the walls. Lena pressed flat against the earth, hands clamped over her ears. Then she remembered the revolver in her grip, its weight like fire. She forced herself to raise it, knuckles white. Colt fired again, one rider tumbling from his saddle dust, rising around his crumpled body. The others pushed forward, relentless shouting curses that carried on the wind. Lena's breath came in ragged gasps. One rider broke from the group, galloping toward their hiding spot. She froze, paralyzed. The rider lifted his rifle, aimed straight for Colt's back. Without thinking, Lena rose to her knees, arms shaking as she pointed the revolver. Her vision blurred with tears, but she pulled the trigger. The blast cracked her ears. The recoil snapped her wrist, pain biting through, but the shot flew true. The rider screamed, tumbling from his saddle, his rifle clattering into the dirt. Lena gasped, the revolver slipping from her hand as she stared at what she'd done. Her whole body shook, the sound of her shot ringing endlessly in her skull. Colt spun, saw the dead rider, then saw Lena crumpled on her knees. His chest tightened, not with anger, but with something fierce, something like pride. "You did it," he said, voice low, steady, even through the storm around them. "You saved us." Her lips parted, breathless. I didn't think, That's what it takes." He cut in, firing another round that dropped a third man from his horse. No time to think, just fight. The remaining riders wheeled back, regrouping at the ridge. They weren't finished, not by a long shot, but for the first time Colt felt the scales shift, if only a little. He crawled to Lena, helping her press low against the stone again. Her body was still shaking, tears cutting paths down her dirt-streaked cheeks. But her eyes burned with something new. Not just fear, strength. "You're not helpless," Colt told her. "They tried to make you believe that, but you're not." Her throat tightened, a sob caught between disbelief and release. She nodded once, slow, as if finally letting the truth seep in. Gunfire echoed again, bullets spitting sparks off rock. Colt dragged her deeper into cover, his revolver steady in his hand. "This is just the start," he said, his voice low, carrying over the roar. "Barlow's coming. He won't send just dogs forever. He'll come himself." Lena swallowed hard, her fingers brushing the revolver she'd dropped. She picked it back up, her grip firmer this time. "Then we'll be ready," she whispered. Colt's eyes flicked toward her, meeting her gaze in the chaos. And for the first time, he saw not just a broken girl fighting to survive, but a woman rising from the ashes, willing to stand beside him. The canyon held its breath. Dust swirled. The hoofbeats grew louder again. The battle was far from over. Smoke still clung to the canyon when Colt Harrington pulled Lena Marlowe to her feet. Her hands were trembling, her face streaked with dust and tears, but she still held the revolver. Not like a frightened child clutching a talisman, but like someone who had finally realized her own hands could shape her fate. The riders had pulled back for now, their shadows scattering toward the horizon. But Colt knew what that meant. They weren't gone. They were circling, waiting, sharpening their teeth for the next strike. He scanned the land, every scar of ridge and shadow of cedar tree. Then he nodded to the north. "We ride hard," he said. "One last push. My ranch ain't far now." The word ranch hung strange in the air, as if too fragile for a world full of bullets. Lena swallowed, voice hoarse. "You have a homeland," he corrected. "A cabin. A place no one bothers with. Too far, too quiet." His eyes shifted to her, steady. "It's yours now, too." Her throat closed. She turned her face away so he wouldn't see the tears that leapt to her eyes. No one had ever said such words to her. "Yours now." They mounted again, the mare weary but faithful, and rode through the narrowing ridges until the land finally began to open. By late afternoon, they crested a hill, and Lena gasped. Below, nestled against the line of cottonwoods, lay a cabin of weathered logs, its chimney leaning, its roof patched with tin. Fences sagged in the fields, and weeds climbed through old furrows. It was not much, but it was more than she had ever known of safety. Colt halted, the mare dismounted, and lifted her down. She stood staring, clutching the blanket around her, the revolver heavy in her hand. "It's yours," she whispered. "Was mine?" Colt said softly. "Was hers too." His voice cracked on the last word. Lena glanced at him, saw the weight behind his eyes, the ghost pressing against his shoulders. He turned away, leading the mare toward the lean-to stable. "I never thought I'd bring anyone back here," he muttered. "But I reckon the land's been waiting for a reason." Her lips parted, but no words came. She followed him into the yard, feet dragging as if afraid the cabin might vanish if she looked away. Inside, dust coated everything, but the walls still stood strong. A rocking chair rested by the cold hearth. On a shelf, a cracked porcelain pitcher sat beside a child's rattle, untouched by time. Lena froze, staring at the rattle. "Colt," she whispered. He stiffened. His hand closed around the revolver at his hip, then fell away. He stepped to the shelf, picked up the toy, turned it once in his hand. "My daughter's," he said quietly. "Never held her. But I kept this." The silence thickened, pressing on both of them. Lena's eyes blurred with tears. She reached out, then drew her hand back, ashamed to touch something so sacred. Colt set the rattle back with care, then looked at her. "You've lost. I've lost. Maybe this place can be where we start holding on again." Her knees weakened and she sank into the rocking chair. It creaked, swaying gently as if it remembered the weight of someone who once sat here waiting for him. "I don't know how to live in peace," she confessed. Her voice broke. "Every time it's quiet, I wait for the door to open, for hands to drag me back." Colt knelt in front of her, his broad frame filling her vision. "Then we'll teach you," he said. "Day by day, breath by breath. You'll learn that not every silence means danger. Some silence means freedom." Her lips trembled. She pressed her hands to her mouth, shoulders shaking with the sobs she had been holding back since the night she first met him. For the first time, she allowed herself to break not out of fear, but out of the fragile possibility of healing. Colt rose, turned toward the door, but his eyes hardened as he scanned the horizon. The peace inside these walls was only a pause. Barlow would not let go. That night, as the wind moaned through the trees, Lena lay curled on the cot beneath a patchwork quilt, the revolver within reach. Colt sat by the window rifle across his knees, eyes fixed on the darkness. The cabin breathed with their ghosts, but it also breathed with something new. Promise. And somewhere beyond the tree line, a lantern flared in the dark. Barlow's men were closer than ever. The lantern winked out beyond the tree line, but Colt Harrington didn't need the light to know they were there. He could feel them, the weight of men watching, waiting, their hunger pricking the night air. Barlow Crane's dogs had found the ranch. Inside the cabin, Lena Marlowe stirred on the cot. She woke with a gasp, clutching the quilt eyes wide in the dark. "What is it?" she whispered. Colt didn't turn from the window. His voice was low, flat, steady as an oath. "They've come sniffing." Fear flared in her chest. She sat up, pulling the revolver from beneath the quilt. Her hands trembled, but she gripped the weapon like she'd been born with it. "Will they try tonight?" "Not yet." Colt's silhouette shifted as he stood moving toward the door. Men like them test a fence before they break it. But they'll come, when they think fear's soaked into your bones. Lena's throat tightened. And when they do, Colt turned his head, and in the faint moonlight, she saw his eyes glint cold. "Then we remind them, wolves ain't the only hunters on this land." She pressed her hand over her mouth, trembling not just from fear, but from the quiet certainty in his voice. By morning, word had spread through the nearest town. A rancher had defied Barlow Crane. Some whispered admiration, others muttered warnings, but all agreed on one thing: Colt Harrington had signed his own death warrant. At the trading post, 2 men leaned against the porch rail, spitting tobacco. "Fool's bound to be dead inside a week," one said. "Barlow don't forgive, and he sure as hell don't forget." The words drifted through the air, reaching Lena where she stood beside the wagon, clutching a sack of flour Colt had pressed coin for. Her cheeks burned as the men's eyes slid over her, their sneers cutting deeper than knives. "That's her," the other man muttered. "Barlow's property. Harrington's playing house with a tainted girl." The word struck like a slap. Lena dropped her gaze, shame flooding her chest. Her lungs squeezed tight until it felt like she couldn't breathe. She turned, stumbling toward the horse hitched at the post, desperate to escape their eyes. But Colt was there, loading supplies into the saddlebag. He saw her face, pale and stricken, and knew. "What'd they say?" he asked, voice low. She shook her head, tears rising. "Doesn't matter. It matters." His voice sharpened. Her breath broke. "They called me tainted, said I'm still his, still Barlow's." The words cracked something inside her. She pressed her fists against her stomach, curling inward as if the shame were a knife twisting deep. Colt's jaw locked, his eyes dark as storm clouds. He turned on the men, his boots striking the boards hard. Both straightened, their smirks faltering as Colt loomed. "You open your mouths again," Colt said, voice low as thunder, "and I'll sew 'em shut with lead. She don't belong to Barlow. She don't belong to you. She belongs to herself, and any man who says otherwise answers to me." The men swallowed hard, their bravado draining like water through sand. They muttered curses but turned away, spitting into the dirt. Colt returned to Lena, his hand steady on her shoulder. "Don't you listen," he said. "They're cowards hiding behind words. They've never stood between a devil and the soul he tried to break. You have. That makes you stronger than both of them." Her tears spilled, then hot and silent, but her spine straightened beneath his hand. For the first time she believed him. That evening, back at the ranch, Lena walked the edge of the creek that wound through the cottonwoods. The water shimmered, catching the fading light, and she thought of all the times she had been called nothing but ruined. For a heartbeat, she wanted to run. Leave, Colt, leave. The fight vanished before Barlow's men swallowed them both. She stood on the bank, breath shaking, staring into the water. But then she heard his voice behind her, thinking of leaving. She turned, startled. Colt leaned against a tree, arms crossed, watching her. His face carried no anger, only sorrow, deep and patient. "I thought about it," she admitted, her voice cracking. "Because maybe they're right. Maybe I am nothing but shame." Colt pushed off, the tree stepped closer and stopped only a breath away. "Lena, look at me." Her eyes lifted heavy with tears. "You are not shame," he said. "You are not coin or property or a name in another man's book. You're the choice I made. My choice. And I don't regret it." The words hit her harder than the insults had. She gasped, covering her mouth as tears broke loose. For the first time, she let herself believe she was not something broken to be hidden, but someone worth standing beside. Behind them, the cottonwoods shivered in the evening wind. But beneath that sound came something else. Hooves, distant but closing. Barlow Crane was no longer sending shadows. The storm itself was coming. The night carried the sound of hooves like war drums rolling across the prairie. Colt Harrington stood at the edge of his cabin porch, rifle balanced across his forearm, eyes fixed on the line of lanterns weaving through the cottonwoods. They weren't scouting anymore. They were coming. Inside Lena, Marlowe pressed her back against the cabin wall, her breath quick, shallow, her hands trembling around the revolver Colt had drilled into her grip. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind outside made her flinch. Colt stepped back inside, closing the door quietly. His face was carved from stone, shadowed by the lamplight. "It's him," he said simply. Her stomach clenched. Barlow Colt nodded once. "He's tired of dogs doing his biting. He's bringing the pack himself." The words chilled her deeper than the river ever had. For days she had dreaded the thought, and now it was real. Barlow Crane, the man who had chained her, sold her, stripped her of everything, was riding here. Colt crossed the cabin, began checking every round of ammunition, every latch on the shutters, every line of cover the room offered. He moved like a man preparing not for survival, but for war. "You've trained me with the gun," Lena whispered. "But I don't think I can, you can." He cut in his tone, hard but not cruel. "And you will, if you must." Her voice cracked. "What if I freeze?" Colt paused, turned, and crouched low in front of her. His hand rested lightly on her shoulder. "Then you listen to me. You listen to my voice, and you do what I tell you. If I say fire, you fire. If I say run, you run. But you don't let fear decide, you do. You hear me." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. He searched her face, then gave a single firm squeeze of her shoulder before rising. They spent the next hours fortifying the cabin. Colt dragged furniture against the doors, set firing positions at the windows, and spread cartridges across the table within reach. Lena carried wood to reinforce shutters, her hands raw, her body aching, but each motion was a fight against the helplessness that had shackled her for so long. When it was done, the cabin looked less like a home and more like a fortress waiting to bleed. Outside, the lanterns drew closer, voices rising like a tide. The smell of smoke drifted on the wind torches carried in greedy fists. Lena stood at the window, revolver heavy in her hands. She whispered almost to herself, "He'll never stop." Colt stood behind her, rifle cradled, gaze steady on the dark. "Then we stop him," he said. The first shots came not long after. Rifle cracks split the night bullets, slamming into wood splinters flying across the room. Lena ducked with a cry, but Colt remained firm, sliding to the window and returning fire. His rifle boomed, echoing off the hills, and a scream carried on the wind. The siege had begun. Lena crawled to the far window, hands shaking as she raised the revolver. Her breath came quick, uneven. She tried to steady it the way Colt had taught her. A shadow moved outside, a man creeping toward the porch. Her finger twitched on the trigger, heart racing. "Breathe," she whispered to herself. "Grip it. Aim. Mean it." She fired. The blast cracked through the cabin. Outside, a man staggered, clutching his shoulder, cursing as he dropped his torch into the dirt. Lena gasped, chest heaving, ears ringing, but she hadn't frozen. She'd fought. Colt glanced back, eyes locking on hers. For just a heartbeat, pride softened the iron in his face. "You're doing it," he said. Her lips trembled. She nodded, fighting the tears that threatened to blind her. Gunfire roared again, slamming into the walls. Colt fired back, calm and precise, his every shot deliberate. But there were too many. Shadows moved through the cottonwoods, circling, pressing, hungry. Lena pressed against the wall, revolver clutched to her chest, listening to the chaos, her heart pounding like it would break through her ribs. Through the noise came a voice, loud and cruel, cutting across the night like a blade. "Colt Harrington Barlow Crane." His growl rattled the air, dripping with greed and rage. "You've taken what's mine, and you think you can hide behind your walls. But walls rot. Men rot. And tonight, rancher, you die with her screaming in your arms." Lena froze, every muscle locking his voice, slicing through her like the chains all over again. Colt stood at the doorway, rifle ready, his face carved with fury. His voice rolled out low, thunderous, shaking the cabin walls. "She ain't yours, Barlow, and I'll bury you before I let you touch her again." The night split with gunfire, once more torches flaring brighter, the siege pressing harder. And for the first time, Lena realized the truth. This wasn't just Colt's fight anymore. It was hers too. The torches swayed like a fiery crown outside the cabin walls. Voices rose, jeering, coarse laughter, crashing like waves against the wood. Bullets bit into the shutters, sending splinters across the floor. Colt Harrington crouched by the window, rifle steady, his breath measured against the storm. Beside him, Lena Marlowe gripped her revolver, her knuckles bone white, her chest rising and falling like she'd run a mile though her body hadn't moved. The siege thundered relentless, but inside silence thickened between them. Every heartbeat shared every breath, echoing like the last before battle. Colt glanced at her eyes, sharp as steel. "You stay behind me, no matter what." She swallowed hard tears, brimming, but unshed. "I won't hide if they come through. I can't. Not anymore." His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. He knew better than to strip her of the strength she had only just begun to claim. Outside, a voice rose above the rest, Barlow Crane, his growl thick with rage. "Bring the torches! Smoke 'em out!" The words curdled the air. Shadows moved fast, fire lifting, high embers raining as they hurled flaming brands toward the cabin. One torch struck the porch, another the side wall. Flame licked hungrily at the dry wood. Lena gasped, stepping back. "They'll burn us alive!" Colt seized a bucket from the corner, threw it across the flames, dousing them in hiss and steam. "Stay calm," he barked. But the enemy pressed harder. Gunfire shredded the night bullets, smashing through the thin walls, one lodging in the rocking chair by the hearth. Colt fired back his rifle, booming, dropping a man in the dirt. "Reload," he snapped to himself, sliding fresh cartridges in with practiced hands. Lena ducked low, peering through the gap in the shutter. Her breath caught as a shadow lunged toward the door, axe raised. Without thinking, she leveled the revolver, Colt's words echoing in her mind. "Grip it. Aim. Mean it." Her shot rang out, echoing like thunder. The axe clattered into the dirt, the man collapsing before he could strike. Her body trembled, her ears rang, but for the second time she had stopped death from breaching the door. Colt's gaze darted toward her. Their eyes met in the chaos, and for a flicker of a second, pride burned in his. "You're holding the line," he said, his voice deep, steady. But the siege was far from breaking. Barlow's men swarmed the yard, torches flaring, bullets tearing chunks from the cabin walls. The mare screamed from the lean-to hooves, striking in panic. Colt gritted his teeth. "They'll push again harder. Get ready!" Lena's breath came fast, uneven, but she squared her shoulders, forcing her trembling hands to steady. "I'm ready," she whispered. The next push came like a flood. 3 men charged the porch, one with a shotgun blasting holes through the door. Colt fired the boom of his rifle, dropping one. The second smashed through the splintering doorframe, only to find Lena waiting. Her revolver barked once the shot slamming into his chest. He fell backward into the dust-lifeless eyes, staring at the stars. The third man hesitated, fear flickering in his face. Colt stepped forward, cold fire in his eyes, and finished him with a single round. The porch fell silent, smoke curling upward, the night echoing with the retreat of boots. For a heartbeat only, the crackle of dying torches filled the air. Lena sagged against the wall, gasping, the revolver slipping from her hand. Her body shook, but her spirit stood. She had done more than survive, she had fought. Colt moved to her side, hand brushing her shoulder. "You did it," he said simply. Her tears spilled hot and unstoppable. "I thought I'd break," she whispered. "You didn't," he said, steady as the earth beneath them. "And now they know it." But outside, Barlow's voice carried again, low and venomous. "You think this is over, Harrington? I'll come myself. I'll drag her back screaming, and I'll make you watch her break." Lena's body froze at the sound, every nerve screaming with remembered chains. But then Colt's hand closed firmer on her shoulder. "Not while I'm standing," he growled. The night held its breath. The storm hadn't ended. It was only drawing tighter, winding toward the inevitable clash. The cabin smelled of smoke and powder, the air thick enough to sting the lungs. Colt Harrington stood at the doorframe, his rifle warm from use, his eyes never leaving the glow of torches that flickered beyond the cottonwoods. They had beaten back one wave, but he knew better than to believe the fight was done. Inside, Lena Marlowe sat on the cot revolver laid across her knees. Her face was pale, streaked with soot, her hands trembling from exhaustion, but her eyes were sharp now, alive in a way they had never been before. She stared at the weapon as if it had become part of her, something she didn't know she could hold until this night. Finally, she broke the silence. "Colt, what if they kill you?" The question was a knife in the dark. He turned the lamplight, cutting lines across his weathered face. "Then you live," he said. Her throat tightened. "I can't. Not without you. Not after—" "You can," he cut in, his voice iron. "You will. I've lived my years carrying ghosts. I don't want that for you. If I fall, you ride. Don't stop. Don't look back." Her tears welled, spilling hot down her cheeks. She shook her head, clutching the revolver tighter. "No," she whispered fiercely. "I won't run. Not again. If I die free. Not chained. Not screaming for mercy that never comes." Colt's jaw flexed, his chest heavy with pride and sorrow tangled together. He knelt before her, his calloused hand brushing the back of hers, steadying the weapon she clutched. "You won't die tonight," he said softly. "Not while I'm breathing." For a long heartbeat, they simply stared at each other, the storm outside forgotten. It was as if the world had shrunk to 2 souls clinging to a fragile vow in a cabin built of grief and defiance. Then the sound shattered the stillness, hoofbeats. Closer now, heavier, each strike of iron against earth, echoing like a war drum. Colt rose, checked his rifle, slid extra cartridges into his belt. "Barlow's coming," he said. The words were not a warning. They were a promise. Lena stood too, wiping her face with a trembling hand. She tucked the revolver into her belt, squaring her shoulders. "I'll stand with you." His eyes softened just for a flicker before hardening again. "Then we stand together." The hours crawled, the cabin wrapped in a silence so thick it was almost holy. Every creak of the wood, every groan of the wind sounded like footsteps creeping closer. Storm clouds gathered over the plains, rolling dark and heavy thunder muttering in the distance. The first drops of rain splattered against the roof, a rhythm like restless fingers drumming. Lena shivered, staring at the door. "Do you think he'll come tonight?" Colt's gaze was steady. "He's out there, watching, testing. Men like him always want to break you slow, let fear eat you hollow before the killing starts." Her stomach knotted, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Then he doesn't know me anymore. I'm not hollow." The words startled her, but when she spoke them, she felt their truth. Colt nodded once, proud and grim. "That's what'll keep you alive." The storm broke. Rain hammered the roof. Wind howled through the cottonwoods, and lightning carved the sky in white fire. In the midst of it, Barlow's voice tore across the night, louder than thunder. "Harrington." The shout rattled the cabin walls. You can't keep her. She's mine. She'll crawl back to me when I tear your corpse from that house." Lena flinched, her hand flying to her mouth. His voice carried every chain, every night she had begged for mercy. But Colt stepped to the door, rifle steady, his silhouette cut by the lightning. "She belongs to no one," he roared back, his voice rolling through the storm. "And I'll bury you in this soil before I let you touch her again." For a heartbeat, the storm itself seemed to pause, as if holding its breath. Then the night exploded. Gunfire ripped through the rain torches, flared in the dark, and shadows charged through the trees. The siege was no longer a test. It was war. Colt slammed the door shut, bolting it as bullets hammered the wood. "Get down," he barked, shoving Lena behind the table. She crouched low, revolver tight in her grip, her heart racing but her jaw set. She wasn't running, not anymore. The storm howled thunder. Crashed gunfire split the night. And in the heart of it, Colt and Lena stood side by side, ready for the fight that would decide everything. Rain sheeted across the land, drumming on the roof in a steady roar. Lightning split the sky, casting the cabin in harsh white for a heartbeat before plunging it back into black. Gunfire cracked through the storm bullets, slamming into wood splinters, cutting the air. Colt Harrington crouched by the door, rifle-braced eyes burning with a fire that had nothing to do with lightning. Every shot he returned was calm, deliberate. Every pull of the trigger was a vow. She will not go back. Lena Marlowe huddled behind the overturned table, revolver clutched tight in her hands. Her heart pounded so hard she thought it might split her chest. But she didn't cower. She waited, listening for his voice, Colt's voice, to steady her. Another shout rang through the storm. "Light it! Burn the whore out!" Barlow. Crane's growl carried like a curse. Shadows surged forward, with torches blazing, rain struggling to smother the fire as they hurled brands at the cabin walls. Flame hissed, smoke curling through cracks. Colt Lena gasped. "I see it!" He fired, dropping one torchbearer. Another fell to the mud, but a third made it close, slamming his torch against the porch post until it caught. The cabin groaned, smoke thickening. Colt cursed under his breath. "We'll have to push him back or we burn with it." He turned to Lena, eyes sharp. "Stay behind me. If one breaks through, you fire. Don't think. Don't hesitate." Her throat tightened, but she nodded. "I won't." He kicked the door open, storm wind tearing inside. Rain plastered his hat to his head, his coat whipping around him as he fired into the night. The suddenness of it stunned Barlow's men, but only for a breath. They surged forward, shouting shots, answering. Colt moved like a man carved from the storm, each step deliberate, his rifle booming, his revolver drawn when the chamber ran dry. Lena, heart in her throat, saw one rider break through the chaos, charging the door with a pistol raised. Her body acted before her mind caught up. She rose from behind the table, leveled the revolver, and fired. The man dropped in the doorway, his pistol skidding across the floor. Her breath caught in her throat. She'd done it again. But this time she didn't shake. She steadied her grip and looked for the next. Through the rain and gunfire, Barlow's voice cut again closer, now filled with rage. "Harrington, you think you're a hero. You're nothing but another grave waiting to be dug." Colt stepped forward into the porch light, rifle smoking, rain pouring off the brim of his hat. His voice rolled like thunder back through the storm. "Come dig it yourself, Barlow." The night seemed to shudder at the challenge. Lena gasped as she saw him, the devil himself. Barlow Crane rode into view, astride a black gelding, his bulk heavy in the saddle, his face twisted with fury. The torchlight lit his features in hellish glow, greed and cruelty etched deep. "Kill him!" he roared to his men. "Leave the girl breathing. I want her screaming in my hands." Lena's blood turned to ice chains rattling in her memory, but she lifted her revolver higher, standing at Colt's back. Colt fired again, a man falling from his horse with a scream, but there were too many. Shots ripped past one grazing Colt's shoulder, spinning him slightly. Colt Lena cried. He steadied himself, teeth-gritted blood soaking through his sleeve. "I'm standing," he growled. And then the inevitable happened. Barlow's men surged at once, overwhelming. One smashed through the window, another kicked through the half-broken door. Chaos erupted inside the cabin. Colt swung his rifle like a club dropping one, while Lena fired point-blank at another, the recoil jolting her to her bones. But in the struggle, a massive shadow filled the doorway. Barlow himself. His knife gleamed in the firelight, his eyes wild as he lunged, seizing Lena by the arm. She screamed, the revolver tumbling from her grip as he dragged her toward the door. Colt roared, lunging forward, his revolver raised. But Barlow pressed the blade to Lena's throat, his laughter cruel and booming. "One step closer, Harrington, and I'll paint your floor with her blood." The storm howled around them, lightning splitting the sky. For the first time, Colt hesitated, his heart slamming, his finger frozen on the trigger. Lena's wide eyes locked on his, and in that single heartbeat she saw the truth. This fight wasn't just Colt's to finish. It was hers, too. Rain poured down in sheets, the storm thrashing as if the heavens themselves were watching. Barlow Crane's arm was iron around Lena Marlowe's neck, the knife pressed so close she could feel the bite of its edge. Her breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, but her eyes locked on Colt. Harrington were filled not just with fear, but with desperate resolve. Colt stood in the cabin's wrecked doorway, revolver raised, rain dripping from the brim of his hat. Blood darkening his sleeve. His chest heaved with rage, his finger tight on the trigger. But one wrong move, one twitch, and the blade at Lena's throat would spill her life onto the cabin floor. Barlow's laugh rumbled through the storm. "You thought you could steal from me, Harrington. She's mine. Always was, always will be." "She ain't yours," Colt growled. His voice was low thunder rolling through the night. "You never owned her. You only chained her. And chains break." Barlow sneered, dragging Lena a step backward, his boots splashing through mud on the porch. "Chains break." His knife pressed harder. Lena whimpering as a bead of blood bloomed on her skin. "You think you broke mine?" "No, rancher, you walked right into him." Lena's pulse hammered in her ears, the world narrowing to Colt's steady eyes. She remembered his words, "Not while I'm standing," and she knew then this moment could not be his alone. Her trembling hand brushed the fold of her blanket. Hidden there, the knife Colt had given her days ago, the small, bone-handled blade he told her might one day save her life. Barlow's attention was on Colt, his greedy eyes locked on the man who defied him. He didn't see her fingers closing on the handle. Colt's voice carried strong and unyielding. "Let her go, Crane, or you won't walk away from this storm." Barlow barked a laugh. "You ain't got the sand to fire with her in my hands." But Lena did. With a cry ripped from the deepest part of her, she drove the knife backward, burying it in the thick meat of Barlow's side. He roared, jerking violently, his knife slashing away from her throat. Colt seized the instant. His revolver cracked once, the shot flashing bright as lightning. Barlow staggered, eyes wide with shock. Another shot boomed. He fell to his knees, blood soaking into the porch, his laughter choking into silence. Lena stumbled free, gasping, collapsing against the doorframe. Colt was already there, pulling her into his arms, steadying her trembling body against his chest. "It's over," he rasped, voice breaking. "You're safe." But Lena shook her head, eyes wide, chest heaving. "No, I killed him." Her hands trembled, stained with Barlow's blood. Colt gripped her face gently, forcing her eyes to his. "No, you saved yourself. You ended the chains. That ain't killing. That's freedom." Her sobs tore loose, then raw and unrestrained. But they weren't just sobs of terror. They were of release of a burden ripped away at last. The storm raged on, washing Barlow's blood into the earth, erasing his presence like the land itself refused to remember him. When the last thunder faded, when the torches guttered out and silence returned, Colt guided Lena back inside the cabin. She collapsed onto the cot, spent staring blankly at the rafters as the first hint of dawn broke through the storm. Colt sat beside her shoulders, slumped his revolver, finally laid aside. His hand brushed hers, not demanding, not taking, just there, a steady weight. For a long moment, neither spoke. The silence was heavy, but it was no longer hollow. At last, Lena turned her head toward him. Her voice was hoarse but steady. For the first time, I don't feel owned. I feel alive. Colt's throat tightened, his eyes burning. He nodded once, solemn. You are, and no man will ever take that from you again. She closed her eyes, letting the dawn light wash over her face. The cabin still bore scars, the walls pocked with bullets, the porch stained dark, the air reeking of powder and blood. But it still stood, and so did they. When Lena finally slept, Colt stepped outside the storm-washed earth, glistening beneath a rising sun. He looked toward the horizon, where shadows fled before the light, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of his ghosts lift, if only a little. Barlow Crane was gone. The girl was free. And though the road ahead would be long broken and full of scars, they would ride it together, because chains had been broken, and in their place something stronger had been forged. Your thoughts will help us create meaningful stories. And if you want to hear more powerful healing stories like this, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, click the bell icon so you don't miss any new episodes. And most importantly, share this video with people who need a little hope today. Thank you so much for your time. We hear you, we listen to you, and we are honored to tell these stories for you.